You can see there coming back into the prologue course, the one and only Wade Young. One thing I noticed last year actually from Wade Young, as the race progressed, the guy actually got faster where everybody else in the field slowed down. Wade learnt the track more, started to really find his groove and got faster and got more accurate and more precise when everybody else was getting sloppy and slower. And you can see him now. He's definitely carrying more speed through the prologue section here. He'd be pulling more time, I'd imagine, on Wade Ibrahim. Popping over those logs like they're small, they really are very intimidating ones. They're above the waist of the average person, and Wade's just riding over them like they're little dimples in the ground, through the ute trays, just carrying that momentum and just punching over those square edges. Those square edges really just stop most wheels in their track and almost punch you backwards. And Wade just hits him with enough speed to actually ensure that, regardless of the angle, that he just keeps on pushing forward. He's taken an interesting line around the outside of the left there. The easiest line is typically through the middle, although it does change. You can see some almost on board footage, very close footage there of Wade Young making his way through there on his Sherco racing model. Sherco's come a long way in recent years, really starting to knock on the door of the likes of KTM and Husqvarna and Beta. They've got quite an innovative engine. They've got an electronic controlled power valve on their engine. So that means that when you flick the switch on the handlebars on the Shercos, it not only changes the ignition curve, but it also changes the way in which the power valve actuates in the two-stroke. What that means is that the entire engine characteristic changes, and the engine can go from a very aggressive, very powerful engine to a much smoother, easy to deal with engine. So quite innovative on Sherco's behalf. They persisted with the carby. They haven't pushed towards two-stroke fuel injection. They're not going to do it until they believe that fuel injection is actually superior to the carburetor, and it's not quite there yet. So look at Wade Young there. He's actually been hung up on those slippery logs, which are spaced perfectly to hang up a motorcycle. So you can see when the clubman riders get hung up on those logs, they look like they don't know what they're doing. If you see Wade Young get hung up on those logs, you know that's a difficult obstacle. Just carrying that speed. We saw a few years ago when Wade Young first came to Wildwood Rock, he'd hit those logs and he'd just plough over them, just smash into them until the suspension absorbed it. But now Wade's getting better. He's evolving with the rest of the hard enduro crew, like Manuel Litton Bickler, and now Wade's actually employing some pretty fancy trials techniques and doing proper double blips over those logs and popping the bike over them. So that's what's required to stay at the top end of this sport. The sport's evolving very rapidly because it's quite young. So each year, the top riders get better and better, and the whole sport pushes forward and advances quite rapidly. Probably more so than any other discipline in motorcycling at the moment, because the other disciplines are a bit more refined. They've been around for a bit longer, and the world's best are really pushing the limits of what's possible. But with hard enduro, it really, as each year goes by, the riders really seem to ratchet up a notch and push the limits further. And we can see that with the likes of Wade Young. Is visibly a different rider than he was last year here at Wildwood Rock, and it's wet and slippery and super difficult here at Wildwood Rock. So for Wade to actually be carrying the sort of speed that he was last year and making it look even easier in some spots is a real testament to how the sport's pushing forward. See number 143 there. He's a Romaniacs rider. And I'm just looking up which one that is. Not Emma. Not sure who rider number 143 is there, but obviously an international a rider that's done some international hard enduros, because they've got the Australia jersey on there. 707, Graham Riles there on his Yamaha two-stroke. One of the few Yamaha two-strokes in the field. Graham Riles, one of the more knowledgeable tuners of a two-stroke engine that in Australia. He has the ability to jet a motorcycle to absolute perfection. Those Riles have been in the scene for a long time and given a lot of advice. Lovely guy, gives lots of advice to a lot of people. So we're starting to get into the last 15 minutes of the race now. And really, once about the 3 hour point kicks in at Wildwood Rock, it starts getting incredibly difficult. It's generally the way that this race goes is similar to most cross-country type races where the first hour is very taxing. Like that. Second hour starts to get hard. The third hour is just torture on the body. And the fourth hour is really a test of the mind. And that's when the ability for the mind to overpower the pain of the body really comes into play into that fourth hour. Number 143 that we saw before lining up near the start line was actually Robert Burrows. Robert's a long-time stalwart of the Australian hard enduro scene. Done Romaniacs many times, and he's one of those few riders that can go overseas to a hard enduro like Romaniacs, party all night, get on the bike the next morning, and ride like a legend. Old school enduro legend is Robbo, as he typically goes for. Stalwart of the scene, always there, no matter what hard enduro you go to. Somewhere along the line, you're going to bump into Robbo. Legend of a guy. You hear some images from over the back there. It's Christopher Maxwell again in the stripy gear. Running pretty well, actually. To be looking fresh and skilled at this part in the race says a lot for a rider's ability. Number 8, Chris Perry again, in that typical Chris Perry style. Hard Enduro Parts top. For those of you who don't know who Hard Enduro Parts are, they're a local Australian-based online retailer that sell the absolute best of hard enduro equipment, all tried and tested by Craig Burns and myself and Chris Perry and quite a few of the other top Australian hard enduro riders. And Hard Enduro Parts only stock stuff that works and been tested. So if you're thinking about buying some bits and pieces for your hard enduro machine, then jump onto Hard Enduro Parts, anything from oils to GPS mounts, all of that sort of thing. Get on there, get the good gear. See Chris here working his way through. It always saddens me to see someone to bring a brand new bike to Wildwood, because nothing destroys a motorcycle like Wildwood Rock. Not even Romaniacs or Sea to Sky or any of those overseas races compare to Wildwood when it comes to bike damage. And that's one of the true tests of Wildwood. It's not just about getting yourself through the race, it's also about getting the machine through the race, because it only takes one crash at the wrong time on the wrong rock and you can cave in an engine case and dump all of your oil. See a gas rider there, pulling out the old Kickstarter, and another gas rider coming through. Oh, there's a good example of what happens when you make a mistake at Wildwood Rocks and drop your bike on the rocks. You're not careful here, you'll punch a hole, cave in a radiator, punch a hole in a case, dent your pipe. Anything can happen. slightest mistake at Wildwood is the most unforgiving place to ride a motorcycle I've certainly ever come across, and I think most of the pros agree too. Even the likes of Graham Jarvis says that Wildwood is uniquely taxing. See those logs before the finish line there, really taking their toll. Let's see, Christopher Maxwell there, number 15 on the Husky there in the silver class. Doing very well at this stage in the race. It's like a Husky TX 300 that he's riding there, punching his way through there very confidently. Somehow I think that Christopher won't be riding silver class next year. He might be mixing it with the big boys. Very tricky little corner there. It's very slippery rocks. They're really polished. And you've got to get onto those power poles and get enough run to get up onto that bridge over the top. Much more difficult than it looks through the Global Racing Oils section there. Through to Peter Stevens' bus. Peter Stevens, one of the more recent sponsors to come on board with Wildwood Rock. Great to see big companies like Peter Stevens starting to embrace hard enduro. I think that a lot of the major manufacturers and brands are starting to realise that hard enduro is becoming increasingly popular, especially with the West Series, the World Enduro Super Series, that is in essence owned by KTM and Husqvarna. Number 6 there, Wade Ibrahim, getting the job done in his usual, just brutal fashion. I mentioned before, he's big, he's strong, he's fit. Nothing slows him down. Wade used to actually ride pretty old crappy bikes, really, and would go riding with him and he'd jump on his bike and it was almost impossible to ride. It was he hadn't really done any form of maintenance or anything on it. The suspension wasn't working. The levers would point in opposite directions. The clutch was super stiff. The throttle didn't work properly. And you just shake your head and think, how can this guy possibly ride this bike to the degree that he does? But in recent years, he's got a lot better with his bike set up. He's realised what it takes and how much difference it actually makes, because hard enduro is a sport of finesse and skill. So having the bike set up perfectly so that the controls work really well is an absolutely essential part of the sport. And it's one thing that Wade's actually really lifted his game in the last couple of years. You can jump on one of Wade's bikes now and it rides like it should. And you find that most hard enduro riders set their bike up very similar in other disciplines of the sport. Look at that. The guy's just about to hit the 4-hour mark and he's got so much energy. He's doing back brake monos in front of the crowd to show off, and then just plowing through the dam. But most hard enduro riders actually set their bike up very similar. If you look at traditional enduro bikes, some riders will point their levers down and other riders will run their levers in different positions and run different gear ratios and set their engine characteristics very differently. But really not so much the case in hard enduro these days. It seems to be that everybody sets their bike up, in essence, to ride like a trials bike, funnily enough. And the likes of Wade Ibrahim, who ride their bike a few times a year, even they have cottoned onto the concept that if you set your bike up properly, then hard enduro is a lot easier. So anyone who's really interested in getting into hard enduro and learning more about bike setup and what that difference, the difference between a good and bad bike setup makes, the guy to speak to is Rob Nowak. Rob Nowak is a silver finisher at Romaniacs, and he's attempted gold but hasn't quite finished it. But one of the very finest riders in Australia, and a long-time factory mechanic. Used to be a factory mechanic for the Suzuki race team, and you'll very rarely come across someone who could set a bike up like Rob. Got all the little secret tricks He's from Sunbury Bike Hub in Sunbury in Victoria. So if you're looking for hard enduro bike setup trip, have a chat to Rob Nowak. He is the man. See here, one of the back sections heading down towards, I think this is the hill before the Force Accessories staircase. And this hill, as with the paddocks around before the prologue, the hill looks pretty smooth and it looks like the riders are just cruising down there. What you can't see is every 30 centimetres, there's a little bump, and the bumps are about 10 centimetres high. So as you're riding down that hill, it's bang, 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 and it's just punching away and just vibrating away at your wrists and your ankles and your elbows and your shoulders, and every joint in your body is just getting hammered continuously by these little chattery bumps that exist everywhere in Wildwood. And it's just one of those other reasons why Wildwood is so punishing. There's rocks everywhere, there's chattery bumps everywhere, the soil is really unforgiving. It gets the slightest bit of moisture on it, it turns into a consistency that's halfway between toothpaste and grease. And by the time that gets onto rocks, it just makes it virtually impossible to ride. So just a uniquely taxing place to ride a motorcycle, uniquely taxing on the rider and the bike. About time we see Jarvis Bolt coming through again, I think. Haven't seen Jarvis for a little while. Probably been about almost an hour now. In his traditional purple shirt and gold tie. Yeah, can't quite see the number there, but that's a Beta Cross Trainer. Very popular bike for Beta. Fantastic bike at Wildwood. One of my favourite bikes of all time. And they're a slightly lower, very torquey, grunty, slightly softer in their characteristics. And that makes a perfect bike for Wildwood because Wildwood's so taxing that a softer, easy to ride bike is really good.
I'll send it to you.
You see there rider number 007 there on the cross trainer making his way through the prologue there, just working into that GRO, the Global Racing Oil section. Up the Force Accessories Bridge. We've got about 10 minutes to go to the 3-hour point in the race. At the 3-hour point, that's when the clubman and silver level riders bail out. You can see them gathering up there near the start line. They're just waiting for the 10 hours to actually tick over. And as soon as that 10 hours, the 3 hours to tick over, and as soon as that ticks over, they'll all pour across the line, hoping to get their Wildwood Rock Finishers medal. the Dave Horn there, number 206, coming through the GRO section there. Dave, another stalwart of the Australian hard enduro scene. Dave's done Romaniacs a couple of times now, and very, very good rider in his own right. Big guy, manages to carry momentum through sections that'll stop most riders. Dave's a big, strong guy, quite good trial skills actually, and manages to just get through stuff that most riders get stuck on. A little bit like Shane Bowden in the sense that you don't think he's going that fast, but he's always there. Back to number 6, Wade Ibrahim, working his way through in second place. Looks like gold is actually a 3-hour race today as well. So that means that we're really about 10 minutes away from getting to that point where we're waiting for the lead rider to come through, and then the race will be called. Number 93, Tyson Haley. He's a gold rider, riding with a bit of gusto still, coming up to the 3-hour point. That's pretty rare. It's only the fittest and youngest and most skilled riders that are still riding with aggression and really hitting stuff hard at this stage in the race. What we tend to see more of is what we're seeing here, where riders are getting stuck and struggling to get their way out of the holes. Tim Coleman, he's looking a little bit like Wade Young in the sense that as the race goes on, he's getting faster. Even managing to peel the bike sideways in the air and whip it a bit. That's not common for a trials rider, really, like Tim. And so definitely shows that Tim's getting faster and fitter over recent years, if he can still be punching that sort of pace at this stage in the race. Looking over the finish line there, we can see the bronze riders gathering up more and more. There's probably some silver riders amongst them too, actually. Just waiting for that 3 hours to tick over so that they can come across the line without having to do an extra lap. Let's see Tim Coleman there running through the rock garden towards the finish line. Looks like Tim's going to sneak across the line before the checkered flag comes out. So he's got another lap to do. I'm sure he won't be looking forward to that at this stage in the race. Although I guess it does give him a chance to catch Wade Ibrahim, if that's a possibility at all. See him working his way through there. Graham Jarvis, we call that Jarvis shuffling, when you sit on the seat, on the back of the seat, so that all of the traction and drive can be found from the back wheel, but the front wheel's nice and light because you're sitting on the back of the seat, and just paddling lightly, just putting your feet down just to keep your balance, but not actually putting weight on your feet, trying to keep the weight on the seat. That keeps the weight on the rear tyre and spreads the rear tyre out, and that by spreading the rear tyre out gives it a larger footprint and gives it greater grip. A lot of the techniques around hard enduro and trials riding involves weighting the back end and applying pressure to the back end to keep that tyre really spread out so that you get lots of grip. And of course that works very well with the modern generation of FIM style hard enduro tyres. Doesn't do so much on a motocross tyre, but with a hard enduro tyre and a nice soft mousse, you keep that pressure on the back wheel, never take the weight off the seat or the foot peg, and you get constant drive and traction in these very slippery situations. See rider number 7 in there, Steve Scale, looking pretty sore and sorry for himself, as most people are at this stage in the race. '93, Tyson Haley getting caught up on those rocks before the finish line there. We can see those, not the rocks, sorry, the logs, I mean. Those 3 logs, they are perfectly spaced. Steve Brazel, the mastermind of Wildwood Rock, the creator, the owner of the property, and of course the owner of the race itself. By this time, most people who are riding around the track won't be thinking too highly of Steve, and they'll probably be thinking he's some sort of serious sadist, the way he actually puts these obstacles and just spaces them to the point where it makes them almost impossible to ride a motorcycle over. And when you're on a Wildwood practice day or your first lap of the race, it's all pretty cool. It seems like pretty entertaining because the obstacles are a bit harder than they look. By the time those obstacles are covered with mud and you're staring down the 3-hour point of the race, it's not so entertaining anymore. In actual fact, it's just unrelenting punishment. See that crowd there gathering up before the barrel? Those numbers are getting bigger. That's a list of people that really don't want to do another lap. Another one of the riders there coming through that paddock section. You can see they're actually riding quite slow. As I mentioned before, the reason he's riding slow there is not because he's a slow rider. It's actually because there are so many rocks and ruts in that field that it's much harder than it looks to ride through. And then we see him actually peel off. There's Anthony Sola, the man, the finisher of Gold Class at Romaniacs this year. His true style of just absolute finesse, easy on the bike. Anthony's better suited to longer, more arduous events than the shorter Wildwood Rock events, mainly because his style is so effortless. He's not a particularly aggressive rider. He's a rider that's full of skill and finesse. So that means that the longer the race is, the better he goes. So you know that's a difficult hill there. If you can see Anthony Sola, the guy who very rarely ever breaks traction and is so gentle on his machinery, he's digging holes and he's getting off his bike and pushing it and doing little off the bike Graham Jarvis style pivot turns. That is a very steep, very challenging hill. You can see in the background there, someone coming through in the Sherco factory racing colours. That can only mean one thing when a rider's travelling at 2 to 3 times the speed of everybody else. That's Wade Young. Absolute world's best here. Watch him just demolish this prologue course. Everybody else. So it looks like we can see Wade Young coming through here, and I think we've just ticked over the 3-hour point here for Wildwood Rock. And that means that with Wade Young in the lead here, we're going to see him smash these ute trays. Look at that, riding the trays, punching over those square edge bumps on the back wheel. And it looks like this is actually, we're about to see the checkered flag come out here. There's been a lot of relieved riders sitting here on the finish line or on the rest of the course, knowing that that checkered flag's out and all they have to do is get to the other side of it and they've got their finisher's medal. Look at Wade riding probably faster than he did on the first lap, keeping it light over that angled log there, which I mentioned before, super tricky. Coming down, cleaning his goggles, got time to take one hand off the handlebars. That's pretty rare in itself. You can see he's coming through this last little bit. And so what was a horseshoe is now an S. You can see Wade's coming around, punching through those wet rocks. Everybody else is paddling. Wade's hardly even putting a foot down, carrying the sort of momentum that looks like when it's when you don't even have rocks in the way. He's having another go at these rocks. Gee, look at that. Those logs are so perfectly spaced and so wet and slippery that Wade Young's struggling. I think he's actually going to turn around and have another go at them. He's going to try and actually, well, and we see someone go right over the bars there, having another crack at it. Top effort for it. Front wheels just dropped in front of one of those logs, managed to stop him dead and punch him over the bars. Here's Wade Young having another go. Does it beautifully. Pops it over the back wheel, over the next log. And here he is, over the barrel for the checkered flag. And there we have the winner of the 2019 Wildwood Rock Hard Enduro. Wade Young, once again, come out from South Africa for the event, having won it last year. Absolutely dominating fashion, as we've seen Wade do before. Incredible combination of just of fitness and skill, and as I said before, this steely-eyed determination in this young South African. You sit down and have a chat to the guy, very quietly spoken, pretty hard to get a word out of him, lets his riding do the talking, and as we've seen today, his riding's well and truly done the talking. I think in second position, we might have Wade Ibrahim coming through. He's a little way behind now, but looking like a pretty similar finish to last year, actually, with the two Wades in front. You can see the bronze riders all starting to pile their way over now to get there. Now that the 3 hours is up, they're qualified as finishers, even having waited there for quite some time and not doing extra laps like most people think they probably should have, but they've actually sat there and waited for the lead rider to go across the barrel so that they can collect their finisher's medal. Going back to some of these steep hills on the back there. Rider 518. I'm not sure what 518 is there. Looking a bit tired as the race wears on. Looks like Tim Coleman in the background there, working his way through. Tim Coleman working his way through some of those tricky sections in the back. You have that typical beta grunt. They have a very unique note, the beta bikes. They run off the bottom with very strong bottom end torque, smooth torque. Tim Coleman currently sitting in third position, which is about the same as last year, I think. There's some more riders pouring across the barrel there. Look at the relief. The head goes back, look to the sky. Thank God it's over is really what they're saying. Remember a couple of years ago, I rode this race and it was a very hot day. I rode across the barrel, and as soon as the relief hit, I just started throwing up. Basically, dehydration, exhaustion, everything just compounds at once. It's a very, very taxing race. That last lap really is a test of mental strength more than physical fitness. Just pushing yourself to go, even though every fiber in your body is screaming, "Stop now." You see the exhaustion starting to play out. We've got here coming through here, number 8, Chris Perry. But here on the barrel, another finisher there. That's Chris Perry, number 8. Looks like he's come across the line in second position. And the one and only Jarvis Bolt. Look at him there in the purple shirt and the tie on the gas. I think that makes Jarvis Bolt pretty much has the highest number of finishes of any rider to compete in Wildwood Rock. Quite an achievement. So just a correction on that one. Chris Perry is not in second position there. Chris Perry is actually a lap down. It looks like we've got on the screen there is Wade Ibrahim, the machine himself, coming through. Looks like he's going to take out second position and clears the stage on the last lap. Now that is a testament to the fitness and strength of this guy. That stage is pretty hard to clear at the best of times, but to do it after 3 hours of racing at Wildwood is no mean feat. You can see Wade Ibrahim coming around here, chewing up the prologue course. He's coming into camera now. There he is. Without accelerating hard between obstacles, he can see he's got a sniff of the finish line. He knows where he's at this year. I think last year he didn't even realise he was in second place when he came across the line. Pretty sure he knows it now. And so same two finishes as last year, actually, in first and second place. We've got Wade Young, the South African top 10 world hard enduro rider, first. Wade Ibrahim, casual part-time dirt bike rider, in second position, really showing up the guys who put in, who dedicate themselves to this stuff. One day, Wade Ibrahim will realise the talent that he's got and actually dedicate himself to the sport, and the sky's the limit for this guy. But you can see him actually coming around the outside of the rock garden to start with, doing that around to turn it into that S bend, working his way through the mud and rocks. Very difficult rock garden, this one. The rocks are really strangely spaced. You can see him trying to put his foot on rocks and they slip off. The front wheels getting caught by the jagged edges of the rocks and trying to rip the handlebars out of the rider's hands. Big, strong guy like Wade, he's stumbling, trying to hold on to the bike. You can see now he's coming over towards those three super intimidating logs. Looking at it, trying to find a way through. He's basically confronted by a wall of bronze level riders who are in his way. You can see he's got a sense of urgency here. Oh, and he's managed to get his front wheel over that second one. That's a very good effort. Pivot over the last one. That's the last significant obstacle. He just has to pop over this, up over the rocks now. And there he has it, over the barrel. There's your second place. Same as last year, Wade Ibrahim. And that's Steve Brazel, the mastermind of the race there, greeting him on the barrel with the checkered flag, having a bit of chat. Well done, mate. You should ride a dirt bike more often. You could go places. Pretty much what he's saying. And I think we're expecting for in third place that we're probably going to see come across the line here would be Tim Coleman. See that crowd of riders that were waiting to get across the line has dispersed now. It's got people throwing their bikes over those horribly spaced logs. In the background, we can see a rider there digging holes in the rock garden. When your front and back wheels get jammed up against a couple of rocks, it can be very tricky to unjam them without digging holes and just digging yourself into more and more trouble. At this stage in the race, the riders typically don't have enough strength to actually pick up the back wheel and reposition it. It becomes very, very taxing. That last lap when you're heading towards that 3 hour point, arms are jelly, legs are cramping, seem to be running out of breath, throbbing headache, massive dehydration. Really not pleasant. Most people finish if you speak to most people who finish Wildwood and you talk to them within 5 minutes of finishing the race and you ask them if they'll do it again, they look at you with a look as like, are you crazy? This is the silliest thing I've ever done in my life. There's no way I would ever come back here and put my bike and myself through this punishment again. And then you talk to them about a week later and they've got a sparkle in their eye and they've recovered and they're thinking, hell yes, I'll be back next year for more because I want to better my result. That's what Wildwood does. Tends to break your soul, and then you spend the next year thinking about how you're going to actually do better and prove to yourself that you can take it on and get another one of those medals. It's a uniquely taxing race, as I've said before. There are very few other events, certainly in Australia or even the world, that push you physically and mentally like Wildwood Rock does. It's a real testament to Steve Brazell, the owner of the property and the mastermind. He stepped it up each year as the sport has evolved and grown, and the general level of skill has increased. Steve's also just very carefully ratcheted up the difficulty of the course. And it's now got to the point where it's challenging the world's best. We saw Wade Young there. He had a couple of goes at those logs. Very often you see Wade Young have a couple of goes at an obstacle. So we're seeing the riders still coming across here, still getting stuck in these obstacles. There'll be riders coming through almost up to the 4-hour point, because there would have been bronze level riders who came across the line just before the 3-hour point of the race, and who will take almost a lap to complete that last lap. So you've got to remember that these riders that are doing it tough, they're in the bronze class, they're doing it a lot tougher than the pros are doing it in the gold class, and they're doing it for longer because they tend to do it for right to the coming across the line right to that 4-hour point. You can see the rest of the riders starting to come through the tracks here, and through those last obstacles. Whoa, and there's a big crash there on the final obstacle. Rider pops back up, then to get a bit of a burst of energy as you come across the obstacle here. As I mentioned before, I'm sitting here in Portugal, watching the race and commentating, and I just saw on the screen my son walk across the front of the screen. So there's a marvel of modern technology. Up there, coming across. Hard to see who that rider is, but that's one of the gold or silver level riders that we could see just pop over the finish line there. Riders starting to thin out. Not too many riders left coming through now. You can see the rider working their way through that the U-shaped rock garden, very slowly, methodically. Those rocks are just so taxing when you've got no throttle and clutch control left. Often your gloves are wet, can't really feel the controls, trying your very hardest just to get enough grip strength to hang on to the bike. All it takes is the a slight, a mistimed dump of that clutch, and the bike will just pull straight out and rip your hands straight off the handlebars, and you'll fall off the back of it. Or of course, you get to the end of the rock garden there, like that rider just has, and hit the wrong rock on the wrong angle and goes down. Try to put the foot down. There's just not enough gas left in the tank, not enough strength to actually hold the bike up once it gets on a little bit of an angle. And sometimes it's easier just to let it go, regain your strength, and pick it up again when you've got some strength in your arms. You can see the camera pan around there. It's all starting to look pretty empty. Got one rider coming through here with a bit of speed. Who is that we can see there? 515, Cheyenne Jones, Chevy. She's gone out for that extra lap. We saw her stop previously before the finish line. Thought she was going to be one of the riders that actually stopped and waited for the lead rider to go over. But Chevy's about as hard as they come. She's pint size. She's not very tall, but she's strong as an ox and has determination like very few other people I've ever met, and has come a long way in a very short time, having really only gotten into hard enduro over the last probably 2 or 3 years, and has lifted her skill set incredibly in a very short time, and it shows that she's got the general grit and determination and strength that Chevy has. She's just pushing through. She's gone out and done the extra lap when a lot of the guys that were lined up at the finish line, they were too soft to do that extra lap, and Chevy's just shown a lot of them up. So good on you, Chevy. Just waiting here for, looks like we're waiting to see Tim Coleman, who was in 3rd position last time we saw him on camera. He should be coming through quite soon.